All right, and we're back for another great episode of Inside Sports Fantasy Football. It's Gerald Glassford once again from Pop Culture Cosmos coming right back at you here, along with a good man indeed. He is, along with Charles Smith, one of the preeminent hosts for the Inside Sports Show, and you got to check out their upcoming programs as well on the Inside Sports channel. It's my good friend, Chris Lardieri. And Chris, welcome back for another edition of Inside Sports Fantasy Football.
Gerald, thanks for having me back. Pleasure to be here. And we've got 1 week in the books, and we're off and running. Let's see if we can help some teams make some victories here, right?
Absolutely. You know, I know people already, team owners out there, are starting to panic already after week 1 in the NFL. It always happens. People are worried about, I'm going to, what am I going to do? Am I going to drop half my team? I'm going to go ahead and pick up on the waiver wire. I touched a little bit on the waiver wire in our last episode with Jason Dutch from Voice from the Underground about some waiver wire pickups for quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. I wanted to get your opinion before we head into week 2, if there's anybody that stands out on the waiver wire that either you are interested in or that maybe you would suggest somebody should be interested in before they head into next weekend.
Yeah, I think one of the more popular ones was Hollywood Brown, ironically Antonio Brown's cousin with the Baltimore Ravens, who really put up some big numbers, albeit against the JV team, the Miami Dolphins. But the thing that was interesting to note about him is that he did it with, I believe, he played a significantly less amount of snaps than the other Ravens receivers. So as he gets worked into the offense more and the way Lamar Jackson looked, I think that bodes well for him. Another one out there, and we hit on this last week, and I managed to get him in one of my leagues. We talked about holding on to Adrian Peterson because Geis inevitably gets hurt, and sure enough, he did. Props to us for getting that right. And while I do think Peterson's still a hold in the near term here, I think Chris Thompson's the pickup, especially in PPR leagues. When Geis went out, he got the majority of the touches. He can catch the ball. And judging by the fact that I don't think the Redskins are going to be a very good team this year, could be a case where he's getting even more touches on dump offs and things like that. So in the near term, I think Chris Thompson's a play in DC.
You know what? I think you and Jason Dutch are like mind reading each other, because on the Tuesday episode, he mentioned Chris Thompson as well as being a pickup that people should go for. But funny how it comes back to full circle when it comes to Adrian Peterson. I look like I had egg on my face in 1 week. Now I look like a stud out there for some reason, because Jay Gruden, everything's all patched up. I guess using the quote, it's all water under the bridge, as Adrian Peterson said. So it's kind of funny how that all works itself out. Darius Geis did get injured, didn't actually perform well before he got injured, but he did get injured. So right now it's Adrian Peterson. But you're right. As a major play, Chris Thompson could get a lot of touches, both as far as from a rushing and especially a receiving standpoint. So, yeah, that's definitely a good pickup as well. If you have him out there and he's available on your waiver wire and you need a running back, a backup or whatnot, somebody to play in a flex, I think he's definitely a good choice out there for your waiver wire as well. But let's get into it, my friend, when it comes to week 2 in the NFL. A lot of great matchups out there. Are there any that stick out in your mind for players that you think are going to maybe bounce back or continue their success from week 1?
Yeah, there are a few. Keeping with my Miami Dolphins theme, and I don't want to beat the proverbial dead horse or dead mammal in this case, but I think anyone...
That's okay. Ace Ventura did.
I'm glad someone else remembers that movie. But I think you've got to start anyone on the Patriots, short of Antonio Brown, because we don't know what's going to happen. Will the league come down on him? Will the Patriots not play him? That remains to be seen, and that's out of our jurisdiction. I pardon the pun. But one guy who really stands out to me is Sony Michel. Really didn't get a lot of involvement in the offense, as they were just really beating the doors off of the Steelers and throwing a lot more than anything else. But I think here you could see him get more involved. The Dolphins, I mean, look, it's well documented. They've allegedly got players on their team who called their agents Sunday night to demand trades. So that tells you the mentality there. I think he's going to get more touches. I think Belichick will probably work him into the offense more, maybe eat a little more clock and maybe give Brady a break here. But I do think he's due for a big bounce back. And then I'm going to go a little of an unconventional twist. My new Miami Dolphins of the NFC are going to be my beloved New York Giants. That is an atrocious defense, as we saw on Sunday. Cowboy fans, don't get too excited about Dak Prescott. I mean, he hit a lot of open receivers. That was more a function of the Giants' porous defense, which is atrocious at best. But I think you've got a couple Buffalo Bills who played well last week against the Jets. They're going to be back in familiar ground going to the Meadowlands to play the Giants this week in week 2. And I think if you're looking for kind of a deeper sleeper, or maybe you need some quarterback help, Josh Allen and John Brown, they connected a number of times, and I think Brown's going to be a nice underrated receiver to keep your eye on here this season. But I think those guys might actually have a field day with this just awful Giants secondary.
Well, you mentioned the New York Giants. Like you said, I think they're, well, by default, they must be good against the run because they're absolutely horrid against the pass. They look pretty good against the run, so I wouldn't suggest going ahead and rushing against them because they're going to give up a ton of passing yards, I think, as well. I think they just look like they were just awful on the defensive side of the ball. But there's 2 matchups I really think people should look at, one of which, of course, is the obvious one, New Orleans at Los Angeles. I think that's going to be another exciting game. The Rams didn't exactly look like they were on all 8 cylinders when it came to last week, but they still had enough to get the win. But they're going to play in front of their own fans. It's going to be in the middle of the afternoon, LA time. I think it's going to be something where you're going to see a lot of action, a lot of passing, a lot of offense. I think you're going to see both teams go up and down the field, and I see maybe like a 35-31 game where there's a lot of yards involved. So if you've got players on both the New Orleans and the Rams side, I think of any time you're going to start them this week because I think you're going to see a lot of action going on in this game. And if you don't, if you see Jared Goff struggle again, then that's a warning sign right there to Jared Goff team owners that if you have him on your team, maybe there's an issue there that's more that, well, I'm going to use a Transformers thing, that more than meets the eye there because he struggled last week. If he struggles this week, then I think there's probably a deeper rooted problem there. And the last game I want to cover is going to be Kansas City at Oakland, and that's for Sammy Watkins. Sammy Watkins, I'm not going to say he's going to get 200 yards again, but now with the injury to Hill, he's going to be able to be the focus of the offense as far as from a passing standpoint. So you got to be worried that teams are going to focus in on him. I still think he's going to get a lot of targets. I still think he's going to get a lot of catches and yards. Will he have a 200-yard prolific day like that this weekend? I don't think so. Even against Oakland, who we're still not convinced is all there yet, but I still think, you've got to play him. He's still got to be either a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2 for you at this point in time, at least going forward until Hill comes back, because he is going to take a lot of targets from Patrick Mahomes. And on the other side of the ball, is Oakland all that? I mean, they look very impressive in week 1. I'm going to ask you fantasy football owners out there, do you really think that the Oakland Raiders are going to look this good for 2 straight weeks, especially against Kansas City? I don't think so. So I'd be very wary of starting any Oakland Raiders this weekend.
Yeah, and I don't think the Chiefs have a great defense by any stretch, as we saw, even though they knocked out Nick Foles.
You see a lot of yards then for Carr?
I'm not necessarily sure if it'll be through the air. The guy I like, and I do have him in one of my leagues, full disclosure, is Josh Jacobs. I like the way he ran. And I think you can run on the Kansas City defense. But I want to say I was impressed with the Raiders, but then part of me looks at that Denver defense. And other than Miller and Chubb, really, is there anyone that stands out there? I think their secondary is overrated. I think, honestly, Gruden had a nice game plan for them, and they still got too conservative at the end and almost gave it back to the Broncos. But I do think there's some opportunities there. But I tend to agree with you. The problem is going to be, can you keep pace with the frantic and frenetic pace that the Chiefs offense has, where they're just scoring all the time, and then you're getting into the shootout. And if you don't score, then you're falling down to 3 scores. So it's hard to say, but yeah, I think the jury's still out on David Carr by all means.
I think so as well, but you're right. Kansas City's defense has not been that great over the past couple of years. They've got a really, really great offense that's propelled them to the level that they're at now. I think that Oakland, even though it has a decent defense, I think they're going to go ahead and get overwhelmed early and often. That could mean a lot of passing yards for Carr, but it also could lead to some mistakes as well. So I'd be very wary of even Josh Jacobs getting a chance to go ahead and propel there. But if there's anyone on Oakland that's going to get some yardage, it would be Josh Jacobs, because you're right. Kansas City has not had the greatest of defense going forward. And I guess that's going to be, like I said, it's going to be leading into a great weekend for the NFL. I want to ask you one last thing on Monday. Are you buying or selling on the Cleveland Browns? Because at this point in time, they should go in and knock off the Jets with no problem, because Darnold is out with mononucleosis. That's something that can knock you out for at least 3, 4, 5 weeks at least. That's something that everybody I know who's had it, even I a long time ago had it, it knocks you out. It knocks you out hard. So he's gone for several weeks. Cleveland needs to go ahead and pick themselves off the floor. Do you think that Mayfield, do you think that OBJ, do you think the Cleveland offense can finally get its act together? And actually, if there's any point in time, this has to be the time that they put it all together.
Yeah, this has to be, because if it isn't, they're 0-2, and then you're really going to hit the panic button in Cleveland. I had mono too when I was a teenager, and to say it knocks you is an understatement. So I hope Sam Darnold gets well soon. It's brutal to say the least. But what I think too is, when you got a team quarterback by Trevor Siemian, I'll go out on a limb and say there's not going to be a lot of offensive output. So as well as the Jets defense played against Buffalo, it's just going to put a lot of strain on them. So I think this week is a kind of a buy, I would say, for the Browns. If you've got an OBJ, if you've got a Nick Chubb, a Baker Mayfield, I think you're safe with starting them, because everyone's down on them, and this could be the magic they need against what's going to be a struggling Jets team. That said, don't know if the $200,000 watch, whatever OBJ claims he's going to wear on the field again, will help his offensive output, but that's a head scratcher at best, I'd have to say.
I know the NFL will be watching. Pun intended right there for you. We'll be right back with more fantasy football. Check out what's been going on with the Pop Culture Cosmos Show and the PCC Multiverse.
The better that these Marvel films do, the higher the standards are going to be for not just other films in general, but other Marvel films also.
I think it's really hard to end a show with this many fans in a satisfying way.
That's the Pop Culture Cosmos Show.
And the PCC Multiverse.
Playing worldwide on radio 7 days a week and wherever you get your podcasts. One last thing on week 2 when we talk about it, and that's something I want to entitle Fool's Gold. And that's basically for fantasy team owners out there. They have these players that either did surprisingly well above their expectations, or maybe it was a waiver wire player that did well beyond his expectations that everybody's just going to jump on the bandwagon, or you'll get a dozen trade offers for. And it's someone that maybe you should think about selling high for a trade, or maybe it's someone that you think about, I don't know, maybe he's someone that I want to go ahead and maybe start one game at the most, or is someone that maybe I wouldn't touch at all. I think for me, Fool's Gold is John Ross III, the wide receiver for Cincinnati, who had a tremendous game. I think maybe, he's a good waiver wire pickup at best, but he's not going to be able to command the offense from the wide receiver position for too long, because A.J. Green is coming back in the near future. And when push comes to shove, Andy Dalton's going to throw to A.J. Green the most, if that's the case, I think, once A.J. Green is back up to speed. So if you pick up John Ross III on a waiver wire, be wary that it might not be that fruitful for you for very long. I know you talked about Dak Prescott also being fool's gold after a 4-touchdown performance against the porous New York Giant defense. Is there anyone else that had a great game last weekend that you really think could be fool's gold?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with Ross. That was my number one looking at that after. Look, he had a great week 1 against the Seahawks. It was a homecoming for him because he played at the University of Washington. But the guy has a history of dropping balls. That's all to say with that. So completely agree with you there, Gerald. I don't want to say he's necessarily a fool's gold in a traditional sense, but there's a guy who's had a lot of love on the waiver wire this week, and that's Malcolm Brown of the Rams. I know he stole a couple touchdowns from Todd Gurley. I don't want to dismiss his value. I think he has value if you need a handcuff for Todd Gurley, or if you have depth on your bench and kind of Adrian Peterson syndrome. Hold on to him. Gurley still doesn't look 100%, even though he looked better than he did in the Super Bowl. Hang on to him. He may be the starter. In the meantime, he's at best a second running back and what could become a running back by committee. He may steal some goal line carries. He may get you some cheap yardage and garbage time or when Gurley's being spelled, but I don't think he's someone you should really hitch a ride to, unless, like I said, you've got Gurley and you're lucky enough to handcuff him.
You know what? I couldn't agree with you more on that. He is someone that was a big play for a lot of individuals out there for the waiver wire. He was one of the top choices from all the experts, including what we talked about on Tuesday for picking up on the waiver wire. So be very wary when you pick him up, because Malcolm Brown getting 2 touchdowns this weekend or any other weekend could be problematic, especially with Todd Gurley. And the fact that Jared Goff has to spread that ball around to all those prolific wide receivers. I know there was concern about the receivers getting enough targets, getting enough touches. I know Brandon Cooks was the primary question, that he only got a little bit of action in the previous game. So yes, Jared Goff has to keep that ball spread around. We're going to see after this weekend if the Rams are actually up to snuff and actually are still the team that went to the Super Bowl and still is good and prolific, and especially on the offensive side coming up. And Malcolm Brown, like you said, is a part of it, but how much of a part we'll actually see going forward. Well, again, it's going to be a great week too. We've talked about Adrian Peterson coming back to life as far as coming back into the starting lineup. We've talked about fool's gold players that we think are just maybe you should be wary of if you pick them up or you start them. Great week 2 matchups and waiver wire pickups. But last but not least, my friend, I want to talk about one last thing before we head on out, and that is tight ends, something we kind of forget about. I know I touched on it when I was doing the fantasy shows last year, but let me ask you this. When it comes to having a team that's going to go all the way in your league, a team that's going to go all the way to the fantasy football championship, is it a must to have a prolific tight end, or is it something that's just like bonus on top of everything else? Is it the key?
It's not the key. I think of it more of icing on the cake. If you've got a great tight end, more power to you, because it's like having a wide receiver in your lineup every week. And believe me, I have George Kittle in one of my leagues, and it seems as though last week, at least, every touchdown he got was called back by a penalty. But I mean, the 49ers are going to target him. If you've got him, great. You can count on him getting you points on a week in, week out basis. If you have a middle of the road tight end, just hope you get some points out of him. But in that case, you're going to have to rely a little more on your flex position to get you scoring. But look, there are plenty of teams who have Travis Kelce and aren't that great. The trade-off is you've got to take them with an earlier round pick than you normally would with the tight end, so you don't build up the depth you need at wide receiver and running back. So I don't think it's a necessity, but believe me, 2 years ago I had Kyle Rudolph. He kind of came out of nowhere and had a big year, and it really helped my team. I made the playoffs. It's a nice luxury to have, but it's not the end-all be-all.
I was fortunate late in my draft to go ahead and not only get Mark Andrews from Baltimore, but also as well Delaney Walker, and both did very well for me this past weekend. I think both of those, if you get a chance to trade for them, or if they magically are on the waiver wire, you should definitely give them a shot. But there's one name I think that both of us did not talk about because we're kind of wary of him because of his injury history, and that's Greg Olsen, who had a great game for Carolina today, over 100 yards receiving. But the thing is, how long and how prolific is he going to be, because he has such an extensive injury history? I mean, you get rolling with him 3, 4, 5 games in a row, then all of a sudden he'll be out for the rest of the season.
Completely agree. He's a great tight end. If you need someone and he's out there on waivers, get him. While he's playing, he's going to get you points. The other thing that worries me about him, even if he does manage to stay healthy this year, as a Cam Newton owner, I'm concerned. I don't know if it's time to hit the panic button, but I've got Kyler Murray behind him, and I'm kind of hoping he has more games like he did in the fourth quarter against the Lions, because Cam is not right. I mean, I know he's had multiple surgeries. The shoulder was an issue last year, the foot this preseason, but he does not look right. He looks off balance. His throws aren't accurate. So I think that's another problem you got to deal with Olsen. No fault of his own, but which Cam Newton are we going to get on a week in, week out basis here going forward? The Panthers are 0-2.
Yes, they are. McCaffrey didn't show up. But when McCaffrey and Greg Olsen are your leading receivers or are your top threats from as far as catching the ball, that to me is an issue. That to me speaks for the lack of depth that you have at wide receiver, because we really don't talk about wide receiver much when it comes to the Carolina Panthers. That to me is a problem. And even though Cam Newton threw for over 300 yards, no touchdowns, and for me that speaks volumes about no deep threat that's available or no consistent wide receiver threat that he has. So even like you said, he may not be 100% healthy, but he doesn't really have all the weapons that he should in order to go ahead and become a standout in fantasy football right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's not like Samuels is going to leave you up at night with nightmares. But that said, he had a number of open receivers tonight that, against an iffy Tampa Bay defense, and he just wasn't hitting them. So I'm hoping for his sake, it's just physical and he can get over it. But it does not look like the Cam Newton of old, at least 2 weeks in.
No, but I'm hoping for the best and hoping that changes, because I know he can be a game changer if he gets right. But I'm not sure, like you said, if he's 100% healthy. But we'll have to see coming up in the next few weeks if that's the case or not. Well, my friend, it's been great talking to you about fantasy football. I know you're coming on next week to share more insight when it comes to fantasy football and helping out those fantasy football team owners. Before we head on out, I just want to make mention that you've got Inside Sports coming up with Charles Smith Jr. I know you guys have some plans coming up, so please share us your thoughts on what's coming up with Inside Sports.
Yeah, definitely here in the coming weeks. Those of you who have listened to us, continue to. We appreciate it. We're available anywhere you can download podcasts as well as Podbean. We're going to do a little bit of a change of pace. We've kind of had a lot of fun and even success in picking games, and we're going to focus a little more on that, have a fantasy football segment. Of course, give our sardonic look at the NFL and call it like we see it, like we have for many years. But what we've noticed, too, is we've gotten a lot of traction with our pick segment. People like it. Charles specializes in over-unders for point totals, and I like to pick an underdog each week. And Jake will be joining our show. We'll give his pick. So going to put a little new twist on the Inside Sports Football Talk show. And if you like to follow us, we're on social media, Inside Sports TV or Chris L Sports on Twitter. We're on Instagram. Definitely be sure to give us a follow and keep track of our show schedule.
Absolutely. It's awesome. That's Inside Sports. Now, for us here at this show, if you have a question for Chris, for Jason, for me, for anyone on the team that's Inside Sports Fantasy Football, just email us, isfantasyfootball@yahoo.com. That's isfantasyfootball@yahoo.com. And stay tuned, you basketball fans. I'll be hosting the Lakers Fast Break podcast coming up here in the next few days. Plus, you can always catch my stuff in regards to pop culture on the Pop Culture Cosmos. Well, my friend, it's been great talking to you. I cannot wait for week 2 in the NFL. I'm so excited. Adrian Peterson is back. I'm curious to see how that works out and how quick of a hook Jay Gruden will have on him if he doesn't perform up to snuff. I mean, we called it early on that I thought he was a play, so I'm glad to see that it's going to work out after all. So I'm taking the egg off my face as we speak. So I just feel so glad about that. I feel vindicated. I feel like I can take a deep breath again. Yes. I feel just good about knowing that at least for once I was right.
Absolutely, as you should. I mean, it only took a week for you to be right, too. So that's record time.
Exactly. And we've got some comments before we head on out. Jake wanted to know, how bad should I be looking to sell Sony Michel after he abuses Miami? So that's planning ahead, and that's so smart. Great question, Jake, and you can always send your questions into us on any of our social media outlets, Pop Culture Cosmos, Inside Sports, and also as well right here at isfantasyfootball@yahoo.com. But yes, Jake wanted to know, it looks like he's going to probably dominate Miami, like you called it earlier in the show. Your thoughts on after he performed so well, should you sell high on Sony Michel?
If you have enough running back depth to pull that off, definitely do. Get some sort of value at a position of weakness, whether it's receiver or quarterback. But, hopefully there's some novice in your league who thinks that Sony Michel is the greatest and doesn't realize that the Dolphins are also that bad. So, yeah, just like with stocks, sell high, buy low.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, my friend. And I couldn't agree with you, Jake. I like how you're thinking there to sell Sony Michel at a very high peak when it comes to most likely a good return after this weekend against Miami. I mean, my gosh, you never know what's going to happen in the New England offense. Sony Michel could be all the rave after 1 week playing against Miami and 2 weeks and 3 weeks. I mean, he did very well last year on a semi-consistent level for New England, but with Belichick, you never know because the ball spreads around so much to who knows which receiver. Maybe you want to get Antonio Brown as much volume as possible before he might get suspended or kicked out of the league or something like that, because there could be that worry, or he could throw around to other receivers. So definitely, if you have a chance to sell Sony Michel high and get a really good trade back for him as far as a great list of players. And Jake said he's got David Montgomery, Sanders, and Singletary plus Dalvin Cook. Now, that's a pretty good lineup of depth, but he definitely wants to move Sony Michel bad.
Yeah, I mean, wait until after Sunday. I think that's good. I think you've got a good cadre of running backs there. But you hit on a very important point. I had Michel last year, and there were weeks where either didn't get the ball or didn't play. Belichick's got this odd little rotation and doghouse and mind game he likes playing with his running backs. So keep that in the back of your mind, too.
Absolutely. So, yes, Jake, those are great questions. Again, you've got a stacked lineup at running back. I think definitely if you want to go ahead and fortify it even more, a trade for Sony Michel, maybe pick up some receivers or even a backup quarterback if you need him. Yes, definitely a trade for Sony Michel for maybe one or two players that'll really sweeten the pot will be great. Because like I said, and like Chris said, he looks like he's going to be able to dominate Miami this weekend. I think without a doubt, I think it's going to be something that, at that point in time, you're going to have to sell Sony Michel because I don't think it will get much better this weekend. Jake said it right there. He needs a wide receiver 3. Great time to pick up a nice wide receiver there. Absolutely. So you've got the depth at running back after Sunday's game, which Sony Michel probably has the best chance of producing at a high level. I definitely think it's time to trade.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Well, Jake, those are some great questions. If you have more, again, you can hit us up always on social media, Pop Culture Cosmos, Inside Sports, or isfantasyfootball@yahoo.com. You can always send an email. We'd be glad to answer it for you. You can always send it to Chris. I can always send it to Jason. We're always ready on the standby to help you out and to help you win your fantasy league. We thank you for watching. We thank everybody out there for listening, and we cannot thank everybody enough for being part of Inside Sports Fantasy Football.